Hey guys, Anthony Smith here at Smith Crafters, and we're getting ready to kick off a new series and a new playlist. This is going to be a how-to playlist on how to make rings that I make. A lot of what I'm going to cover is the processes that I use. However, there are going to be a few stages where we get into other ways to do it as well, such as different methods of making rings, and a lot of those methods I've never tried before, so it's going to be a little bit of a learning experience for all of us. But anyways, we're here in the shop, and it's not much of a shop. It's better than I've seen for some people, but it's also a whole lot worse than what I've seen out there. As you can see, we have insulation in the shop, but there's no sheetrock on any of the walls because we've never gotten that far. But it's nice and warm. I got a little pellet stove over in the corner with a little heater. It's also an air conditioner, which is nice. So it's a little climate controlled, but most of the time, because it's out in the shop, it's not running unless I'm out here. So right now it's a little cold in here because it's still warming up. But then again, it's the end of November in Idaho. It gets pretty cold here. So anyways, I'm going to go around and show you guys the shop just a little bit and show you what I'm working with, and then show you a few of the machines that I have and a few of the tools that I have that I use to make the things that I make. Let's get into it. All right, so we're over here at the main bench where I do most of my work here. Got a nice little air compressor down underneath there, a couple of drawers. This one's all full of material. That shelf over there is all full of material as well. Got some various files and whatnot in this drawer. And then I have my trusty little benchtop metal lathe. And if anyone's curious, this is the model number. It is a Grizzly lathe. I've had a few little issues with this, but nothing major. I've gone through a couple of motherboards, things like that. I've blown quite a few fuses, mostly turning copper because copper is a very gummy metal. And these little lathes, because they're so light and have such a small motor, they don't have a whole lot of torque. And for some harder metals and soft metals like copper that's very gummy, it can struggle just a little bit. I've actually sent off the motherboard to a guy. If I can find out where he's located, I will try and put a link in the description to get into contact with him if you're having the same issues. But he actually rebuilt the motherboard that's in here, and I don't know what he did, but he gave me a little bit more torque, and it's been awesome ever since. Also, I would highly suggest a quick change tool rest rather than the normal tool turret that comes with your lathe. Makes a huge difference in just some time savings, and also so that your tools are consistently located in the same spot. Makes a big difference. But here's the main bench. I have all sorts of various things. I have ring chucks and a little brass hammer and a toothbrush. It's a very nice little thing. I'll show you guys why at some point. Also, a couple of paint brushes, very nice as well for clearing debris. Calipers are an absolute must-have, especially if you're turning on a metal lathe, because you will have to measure at least the inside diameter of your ring to make sure that it's the correct size so that you can consistently get the same sizes repeatedly. I have another little set of cheap Harbor Freight ones up here that I use for scribing and things like that, but these are some nice Michitoyos, and these are used primarily for measuring. These are used for marking. Couple of clamps, little saw, all sorts of little stuff, set of pliers, and this little toolbox here is full of most of my metal lathe tools. I have a lot of my cutting bits up here. I have drill bits and taps and dies, and some micrometers for some fine measuring, spare fuses, some more scribing and measuring tools, more taps and dies and drill bits and whatnot. Anyways, this is where I do most of my work. Then over here on this little bench, I have a drill press, which is a very important tool, especially if you are getting material that is flat in a plate that's not round. This will allow you to cut your blanks out with a hole saw. There's also some guys who this is their only machine, is a drill press. They don't use a lathe, they just use a drill press, and I've never made a ring like that, but some point in this series I would like to get into it because I want to figure out how it's done, and that way I can also show you. All right, Rocco, watch out. Say hi to the shop dog, Rocco. His name's actually Rock, but he has many nicknames. I would also highly suggest a nice little grinder like this so that you can keep your tools nice and sharp. I have some fairly high grit stones on here to keep my tools very sharp, but you don't entirely need that. I would suggest at least one high grit stone. You don't need two, but that way you can keep your tools nice and sharp. I also have a belt sander over here with a disc sander, but this old little Sears Craftsman belt sander died on me recently, so I need to replace it. It no longer works. It doesn't turn on. Then I have this toolbox here, and there's honestly not a whole lot of woodworking or turning tools in here. I'm a motorcycle mechanic by trade, and I have wrenches and ratchets and all sorts of that kind of stuff in here. You know, just various tools to get things going. I do have some drill bits in here. The missing ones are either broke or somewhere over there. Just all sorts of various tools. Some of these tools will come in very handy if you end up with a lathe, because occasionally you might have to tear it apart and repair some stuff. So having a small set of tools is probably a pretty good idea. Also over here I have my wood lathe. I picked this guy up. It's an old Rockwell. They don't even make lathes anymore. This thing is older than me, I think, honestly. And I was born in '96, so... but anyways, I just use this as a buffing station now. But it used to be that this is what I did everything on. I bought this when I was a freshman in high school and have used it to do all sorts of stuff. I've made rings on it. I've made duck calls. I've made pins. I've made a couple of bowls. I've made all sorts of things on this old trusty wood lathe here. But nowadays, it is just a buffing and polishing station. Haven't done any wood turning projects on this lathe in quite a while. But I got all sorts of more material down underneath there. I have more material than I know what to do with. I have a bunch of pen material on the wall right above it. It's a mess. I also have this nice little planer here. I picked up at a yard sale, and I haven't honestly. I think I've used it once. I had the blades sent off. They're sitting right here. To be sharpened by a buddy, and I don't think I've used it since. Just used it for a couple of home improvement things around the house. Over here is a table saw. It's just a nice little Craftsman. Again, real old, real cheap. Mostly, again, used for home improvement stuff. You could use this for cutting up some material, but you honestly don't need it. Same with the chop saw over in the corner. Not a big deal. But as you can see, there's also a dirt bike parked right in the middle of my shop because this is where I store it. Sometimes it's in the way, but I kind of have it shoved out of the way for now. Anyways, back over to here. This is the resin casting station over here, and got me a nice little scale. You will absolutely need a scale. Well, you might actually not, but depending on the resin you're using, a lot of them are weighed. And to mix them, you have to have equal parts A and B by weight, so you will need a scale. You will also need a pressure pot. This is a nice little Harbor Freight pressure pot, but the first pressure pot I got, and an alternative, this is actually an old stucco sprayer. My pastor gave this to me when I first started casting resin, and the cool part about this is the pressure tank is very tall. It's not very wide, but it's tall, and this works awesome for casting things in PVC pipes. But the cool part is it also has a built-in air compressor, so I can just hit the button and turn it on, and it pressurizes after I put the lid on there, and I don't have to hook it up to my air compressor, which is kind of nice because sometimes that's empty and it takes a long time to fill up. But there's various other tools over here. I have all sorts of mixing cups, some silicone, just some regular plastic cups, mold release. And then I also have a vacuum pump and chamber, and you don't exactly need this. Honestly, the only thing I almost ever use this for is when there's material in my resin, I pull a lot of the bubbles out of the resin. I degas it before I pour it into my mold, such as when I'm casting things like shredded money. A lot of air bubbles can get caught in here, and I use the pressure pot to pull the bubbles out. Various molds out of all sorts of different material. I have silicone, PVC, some plastic molds, all sorts of stuff, and that is what I use to get my material made. Then I also have a metal cutting bandsaw over here. I picked this up from Harbor Freight a couple years ago, and this thing has been awesome. It's not a powerhouse or anything like that, but it does an awesome job at cutting my material. I would highly suggest a bandsaw for cutting material. But you don't need a bandsaw like this. You could use a bandsaw like this, but as you can tell that this little bandsaw here, the wood cutting bandsaw, is kind of used as storage for now. But again, the shop is a mess. Like I said, there's a dirt bike, there's goose decoys, there's all sorts of various nicks and knacks and things that don't entirely belong in the shop, but there's no place else to put them, so they're here. So let's talk about material for just a second here. There's multiple ways to get your ring blank, something very similar to this is what you will want to start with. There's multiple ways to get to that stage so that you can get ready to mount it on the lathe and begin creating a ring. I prefer using something like this, a nice about 1.5 by 1.5 inch square that's long. I believe this is about 8 inches long, and then turning it down into round stock, or just starting with round stock from the very beginning by using a PVC pipe to cast your blanks. But then again, you don't have to cast your blanks. You can buy your material. In fact, both of these pieces of material were bought from Tom over at Beyond Wood Products. By the way, amazing material. Highly suggest Tom. This one hasn't been turned round yet, but this one showed up just like this, and I have already made it round. Another way to get your material is by using a plate. And like I was saying earlier, you can use a hole saw with your drill press and cut these out. Again, technically you don't even need a drill press. You could use a hand drill and just drill these out with a hole saw, and you'll end up with a nice little ring puck such as this. The pilot hole there in the center is not entirely needed, but the hole saw that I'm using has a nice little drill bit in the center of it, which I find handy because I have to cut out the middle of the ring anyways. But there's other hole saws that you can use, such as these cheap little diamond bits that don't have any drill bit in the center of them, and they just cut out nice little round chunks. But yes, this is a fairly popular way to get your material, by just using a plate. There's certain materials that this is the only way that you can get it, such as carbon fiber, as far as I know. I mean, I guess you could buy some rods, but the easiest and least expensive way to get your carbon fiber material is by just buying a plate of it and hole sawing it. So that's one method. And here's another. So I will cover this a little bit more in detail later on in this series. I just want to cover some bases about what we're going to be going over here. So that's one of them. So if you're looking around at the shop and you're seeing all the things that I say that I use on a fairly consistent basis and you don't have those, don't worry. There's no need to freak out and panic and think that you can't do this yet. There's very budget-friendly ways to get this done. If you're wanting to make rings to sell yourself kind of professionally, I would suggest picking up some of these tools. You don't need all of them, but they would definitely help. If you're only going to be making a couple of rings, don't go out and buy a $500 to $800 lathe just to turn 2 or 3 projects on, because then it's just going to sit there and you're probably never going to use it again. But we're going to cover all sorts of different things on the processes that to get a ring into the finished state. We'll go over how to use a metal lathe, various techniques and procedures that you perform on the metal lathe. We'll go over how to use a set of calipers to properly measure things. We'll go over how to cut material, how to make material. So if you're going to be casting your own resin, I'll go into some details about how to get a nice solid blank that you can use that shouldn't give you any issues. If you've never casted material before, be prepared for a teeny bit of a struggle and a little bit of a learning curve. It's nothing massive, but your first several times that you try to cast material, it's probably not going to go well. You're probably going to have a couple of failures. I've had a lot. Luckily, when I first started, though, it only took me 2 or 3 tries until I got it right, and that little bit of confidence builder kept it moving. But through the years, I've had some mess-ups. I've had a couple of big mess-ups, which are a little bit costly and beat you down just a little bit, but you got to keep on moving and push through it. But we'll get into other subjects, like what materials I use and how to cut some of those materials. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna cover copper because I'm not very good at it, and I've only made a few copper rings. But brass, maybe some stainless steel, definitely resin because that's what I use the most. Do a little bit of carbon fiber, definitely wood because I use a lot of wood as well. I absolutely love resin and wood. Those are my 2 favorite materials. Also, even do a little bit of antler. You got to be careful when you're turning things like bone or antler because they're very, very porous materials, and they're kind of hard to measure because your calipers will slip into those little pores and those grooves, and you won't get a very accurate measurement. So we'll take our time measuring that and make sure we get it right. That way there's no mess-ups moving forward, especially if you're making a multi-part ring like one with a liner, so it's a different material on the outside and a different material on the inside. You'll want to be very precise in your measurements for something like that, but we'll get into that as well. And then we'll also cover things like material prep and all sorts of different things. It's going to be a blast. I'm going to try and show you guys almost everything I know. I'm not going to do everything because there's a few things that are a little bit of a trade secret that everybody has, and nobody wants to hand those out. But for the most part, I'm going to show you guys how to do everything that I do, and I hope you all enjoy. Oh, and one more thing. If there's anything that you guys want to see specifically, like how to mix resin, or how to get bubble-free castings, or how to use a vacuum pump, or how to set it up, or how to set up a pressure pot, or how to cut chamfers, or anything like that. If there's any processes or details that you guys specifically want to know, let me know. Leave them down in the comments, and I will do my best to get to those things. All right, have a good one.